Hey friends, welcome back. You're listening to The Still Bible, where the teachings of Jesus flow softly like calm waters, bringing peace to your heart and rest to your soul. Tonight, we'll take a slow, tender walk through the night into a quiet place where His presence lingers, where worries fade, and where the voice of Jesus speaks softly to weary hearts. Imagine it with me now. A candle flickers by the bedside, its glow trembling against the soft hush of the room. The world outside grows still. The gentle wind moves through olive trees beyond the window, whispering secrets of peace only the night can carry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you can, share your location and local time in the comments below. It's a beautiful thing to see how far this circle of stillness reaches across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's reflection together. The night had settled softly over Galilee, like a shawl drawn close around the shoulders of the earth. Shadows stretched gently along the hillside, and the air carried the scent of evening flowers, of grass warmed and cooled again by the breeze. Somewhere far away, the faint sound of water brushing against the shore murmured like a lullaby. It was the kind of quiet that made one notice the heartbeat within, slow, steady, alive. In that calm there was a stirring, not of restlessness, but of remembrance. The kind that comes when the mind, weary from its own racing thoughts, finally surrenders to stillness. Once someone said that Jesus' peace isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It waits, patient, kind, certain. Like moonlight resting on the surface of the water, it reaches the heart not by force, but by presence. He had often spoken of rest, not merely the kind that comes from sleep, but the deep rest that touches the soul. "Come to me," he had said, "and I will give you rest." The words still lingered in the air long after the sound of his voice had faded, finding their way into the silence of countless nights like this one. There, in that quiet moment, the listener could almost see him, sitting by a fire at the edge of the lake, his robe gently moving in the breeze, his eyes reflecting the light of the flames. He spoke not of great miracles or crowded places, but of peace, of laying burdens down, of trusting that tomorrow would hold its own grace. The night deepened, and the stars began to shimmer, each one a tiny reminder that light still existed even in the deepest dark. As the wind brushed through the trees, it carried with it a calm that felt alive. And the weary heart listening now could feel it too, the sense that the same peace hovering over the lake 2,000 years ago could still settle softly here tonight. In the quiet, the world slowed its spinning. The thoughts that once felt tangled began to loosen, like threads in gentle water. And somewhere deep within, a voice whispered, not loud, but sure, "Be still. You are not alone." The candle's flame flickered again, and its light stretched gently across the room. And in that glow, one truth settled over the soul like a blanket of comfort. Jesus was near.
The night continued to breathe softly, its rhythm slow and tender, like the quiet pulse of creation itself. The candle's glow trembled faintly in the darkness, casting ripples of gold against the walls. Somewhere beyond the window, a night bird called, its voice rising and fading into the still air. Inside, the listener lay awake, not from noise, but from the restless turning of the mind. Thoughts drifted and returned like waves carrying fragments of the day that refused to settle. And yet, in that quiet unease, another voice began to stir. Not of worry, not of fear, but of peace. It came softly, like a whisper across the water. Jesus' voice, not in sound, but in spirit, not in thunder or storm, but in the tender stillness between heartbeats. The restless mind, once consumed by the noise of its own questions, began to hear something different. The tone of comfort, the language of love that spoke without words. Long ago, he had calmed storms with nothing more than a phrase, "Peace, be still." But his power had never been only for wind and sea. It was for hearts, too. Hearts that trembled beneath the weight of what-ifs. Hearts that forgot the taste of calm. That same peace, the one that quieted the waves of Galilee, still moved through the world like a soft current tonight. It reached the weary mind lying awake, speaking gently, "You are safe. You are seen. You are loved." The listener took a slow breath. It wasn't deep at first, just enough to notice the air as it entered, cool and steady, then left again in warmth. Each breath became a quiet prayer, each heartbeat a reminder that life, even in its anxious rhythm, was held in divine hands. The mind, though restless, began to listen differently, no longer chasing answers, but waiting for peace to arrive. Jesus had once said that his sheep knew his voice, that when they heard it, they followed, for they recognized the tone of love. That voice didn't argue, it didn't scold, it simply called home. And tonight, it called softly through the dark corridors of sleepless thought. "Rest, little one," the voice seemed to say. "You have carried enough today. You do not need to hold the whole world in your hands. I already do." And in that sacred moment, something shifted. The thoughts didn't disappear entirely, but their edges softened. They no longer cut. They drifted like clouds across a moonlit sky, passing without demand. The mind, tired from its own spinning, found an anchor. The memory of Jesus' calm, his compassion, his steady presence that never rushed or condemned. The candle's light danced again, tracing soft golden arcs across the ceiling. Shadows wove themselves into patterns, like the rhythm of an old lullaby, familiar and safe. And as the listener watched, a realization came. Even in sleeplessness, there was grace. Even in wakefulness, rest could be found. Not in the body's stillness, but in the heart's surrender. Outside, The night seemed to listen too. The stars hung quiet, as though they too remembered his words. The olive branches swayed lightly, not in chaos, but in worship, a gentle bow to the Creator who held all things in harmony. And there, in that sacred stillness, the restless mind began to yield. Thoughts faded into whispers, and whispers into silence. Jesus' peace was not loud, but it was stronger than noise. It didn't erase the mind's questions, it embraced them. It didn't demand sleep, it offered rest.
The room was still now, wrapped in a hush that felt almost sacred. The candle burned lower, its small flame bowing gracefully as if in prayer. Outside, the world continued its quiet song. The rhythm of crickets, the sigh of the wind through the leaves, the faint ripple of night air brushing across the earth. In that stillness, the mind began to wander, not with fear this time, but with remembrance. Gentle memories rose like soft lanterns in the dark, glowing faintly, guiding the heart back toward peace. There were moments, old, familiar ones, when the listener could almost remember hearing Jesus speak. Not in a literal sense, perhaps, but deep in the spirit, where his words had once settled long ago. Maybe it was a time of worry, when everything felt uncertain, and those gentle words had come to mind. Do not let your heart be troubled. They had felt like a hand resting on the shoulder, light yet steady, urging calm where panic once lived. And as the listener lay there in the soft dimness, the same words rose again, quiet but strong. They weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. For the voice of peace is never loud. It's steady, patient, enduring. The anxious spirit, like a wild bird caught in its own fluttering, began to rest again in that familiar sound. Jesus had always spoken gently to those who feared. To the woman trembling at his feet, he had said, "Go in peace, your faith has made you well." To his disciples lost in the storm, he had asked, "Why are you afraid?" His words never humiliated. They healed. They lifted. They steadied the trembling soul until it remembered that fear was not the final truth. Love was. And love, when remembered, is stronger than anxiety. It calms what logic cannot. It breathes life into the moments that feel too heavy to bear. Tonight, as those memories of his voice drifted through the air, something inside began to quiet completely. The listener could almost picture it. Jesus sitting nearby, perhaps under a tree by the water's edge. The moonlight touched his face, and his eyes reflected the peace he carried. He didn't speak with many words. He simply was, and his presence alone was enough to remind every anxious thought that it was safe to let go. A slow breath entered the lungs again, steady, full, alive. With each inhale came a memory of mercy. With each exhale, a release of tension. The mind, once racing, now floated in rhythm with the night. The heart remembered the stories, how he lifted the weary, how he healed with compassion, how he invited all who were burdened to come to him and find rest. The candle flickered once more, its light tracing slow, soft shapes across the ceiling. The listener's eyes followed the glow until it blurred, until thought itself became less sharp. It was enough just to be here, to remember, to breathe, to trust. In that tender remembering, something profound stirred. The anxious spirit that had once refused to quiet now felt as though it was being gently held, not by control, not by effort, but by grace. The same grace that once walked the dusty roads of Galilee was still alive in this quiet room, wrapping itself around a weary soul. And in that grace, there was no need to struggle anymore, only to rest, only to remember. The flame trembled as though alive, breathing softly in rhythm with the night. Each flicker painted new shapes upon the walls, shifting light and shadow that moved like gentle waves across the room. It was beautiful in its simplicity, that little flame, small, fragile, yet utterly faithful. No matter how the air stirred, it held its ground, glowing with quiet determination. And somehow, that candle became a mirror for the heart, a reflection of what Jesus often spoke of when he said that light cannot be hidden. The listener watched it for a while, eyes half closed, thoughts drifting in the golden shimmer. The flame's dance seemed to whisper a truth too easily forgotten, that even the smallest light, when guarded by peace, can drive away the dark, just as faith, when nurtured in stillness, can warm even the coldest corner of the mind. Long ago, Jesus had told his followers to be lights in the world, not bright with pride, but gentle with grace. He never asked them to burn with noise or spectacle, only to shine where they stood. The candle tonight felt like that teaching embodied, a single flame in a quiet room, radiating comfort without demanding notice. The listener thought of all the times that light had faltered within, the days when hope had seemed dim, when fear had cast long shadows over faith. Yet somehow, through every season, the flame had survived. It might have bent, it might have weakened, but it had never gone out completely. That was the mystery of divine presence. No matter how deep the night, God's light endured. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly, like distant candles scattered across the sky. The wind, slow and measured, brushed against the window pane. And in that hush, the listener felt something shift again, a warmth, not from the flame, but from within. It was that same quiet glow that comes when the heart remembers who it belongs to, when the soul, though weary, begins to believe once more that it is loved. Jesus had once said that a lamp should not be hidden under a basket, but placed where it gives light to everyone in the house. That teaching wasn't only about shining outward, it was also about letting his light fill the inward rooms of the soul. There, in the heart's quiet corners where doubts often linger, his light reveals tenderness, forgiveness, and worth. It reminds each person that even broken hearts can glow again when touched by grace. The candle flickered again, its flame bending low, then rising tall as if breathing in and out. The rhythm matched the slow pattern of peace. Inhale, exhale, release. The listener followed that rhythm, and the mind began to drift toward calm. The day's heaviness loosened. The worries, once loud and demanding, seemed to step back, humbled by the steady patience of the flame. The light spread softly across the hands, the pillow, the quiet edges of the room. And somewhere in that gentle radiance, the heart began to feel something familiar. The sense that Jesus' light wasn't distant, wasn't unreachable. It lived here, glowing from the inside out, reminding the soul that darkness is never final, that love always finds a way to shine through. The flame danced once more, tender but alive. And as the listener's eyes grew heavy, the thought came like a soft breath against the heart. Maybe this is what faith really is, a light that keeps glowing even when everything else grows still.
The candle's light pulsed softly, a steady rhythm that matched the calm breath of the listener. Outside, the air carried the faint chill of the approaching dawn, but the room remained wrapped in warmth. In that stillness, thoughts of the day began to stir again, quiet reminders of things unfinished, uncertain, unresolved. Yet tonight those worries felt different. They rose slowly, like mist above morning waters, and just as gently began to fade. It was not by effort that the peace came, but by remembering what Jesus had always taught, the art of trust. He had spoken of it often, in words so simple that even the anxious heart could hold them. "Do not worry about tomorrow," he had said, "for tomorrow will care for itself." Those words weren't commands meant to shame the weary. They were invitations, gentle hands extended toward those who tried too hard to control what was never theirs to carry. Trust, such a small word, yet so vast in meaning. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the quiet decision to rest, even when fear whispered nearby. It was the steady belief that somewhere in the mystery of the unseen, God's hand was already at work. The listener thought of the fields Jesus once spoke of, how the lilies didn't labor, yet bloomed in beauty, how the sparrows, though small, were never forgotten by their Maker. And so the anxious mind began to follow that image of lilies glowing in sunlight, untouched by worry, of birds carried by invisible wind, guided by instinct, provided for by grace. Each breath became lighter, as though the weight of uncertainty was being exchanged for something softer, faith that tomorrow would unfold in its own divine timing. The candle's light trembled gently, casting golden circles that seemed to expand with each breath, and in that soft glow, the listener could almost feel Jesus' presence again, not distant, but near, as though sitting close by, speaking with quiet authority. His words were never hurried, never forced. They flowed like the rhythm of the sea, steady and sure. He had often reminded those who followed him that faith wasn't about knowing every answer. It was about resting in the one who did. The listener let that truth sink deep into the heart. Each thought of worry, each what if, each how will I manage, drifted upward like morning fog. And just as the rising sun melts mist from the fields, trust began to dissolve fear's cold shadow. Somewhere in the quiet distance, the wind brushed through unseen trees, a soft rustle that sounded almost like the sigh of peace itself. It was as if creation too understood what it meant to trust, to yield without resistance, to let go without fear. The stars overhead had trusted the heavens to hold them. The ocean trusted the moon to guide its tide. And so the soul, fragile and human, could trust its Maker to carry it safely through the night. The listener's breathing slowed even more. Thoughts softened into quiet wonder. What if trust wasn't something to earn, but something already waiting? What if peace was not found by holding tighter, but by releasing, by letting the heart rest in the hands that shaped it? The candle's light glowed warm against the quiet walls, like a small sunrise within the room.
The night had deepened into a serene stillness, the kind that seemed to slow even time itself. The candle's flame had burned lower now, a quiet sentinel beside the bed, and outside the open window a soft wind began to move. It slipped through the trees, brushed across the fields, and carried with it a gentle sound, the faint rhythm of waves lapping against distant shores. It was as if the whole earth was breathing, a single exhale of peace moving through the dark. The listener turned slightly, feeling the whisper of air against the skin, and in that soft motion came the sense of something holy, a reminder that even the wind, unseen and untamed, was part of God's endless conversation with his children. Long ago, Jesus had spoken of the wind when he taught about the Spirit. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it goes. It moves freely, silently carrying what words cannot express, the sighs of the heart, the unspoken prayers that rise without voice. And so, as the wind drifted through the room, it felt as though prayer itself was being lifted, not loud, not formal, but simple, like breath. The kind of prayer that has no beginning or end. The kind that happens when the soul, tired from its own striving, finally lets go and rests in awareness of his presence. The listener thought of Jesus often praying in quiet places, at the edge of a mountain, in the stillness before dawn, beside calm waters. He had always sought those moments where noise faded and the voice of the Father could be heard more clearly. His prayers were not hurried, they were communion. Love speaking to love, peace meeting peace. And even now, that same spirit of prayer moved through the wind, filling the night with invisible grace. There was comfort in imagining those prayers carried across the waters, each one like a soft ripple spreading outward. Some prayers were heavy, filled with longing. Others were as light as gratitude,
but all of them found their way, drawn toward the heart of God. Nothing spoken in sincerity was ever lost, and nothing whispered in weakness went unheard. The candle flickered once, then steadied again. Its flame swayed gently, as though joining the wind's rhythm, a dance of trust and surrender. The listener breathed deeply, each inhale pulling in peace, each exhale releasing old weight. In the quiet, thoughts became prayers without trying, a sigh for strength, a whisper of thanks, a silent acknowledgement that God was near. Somewhere in the distance, a breeze stirred the surface of unseen waters, and the faint sound reached the window, soft, rhythmic, eternal. It was easy to imagine Jesus walking there once, his feet touching the very waves that now shimmered beneath the moonlight. He had calmed those waters before. He had spoken peace to their wildness, just as he spoke peace now to the restless heart. And as the wind moved, the listener felt the same truth rising within, that no prayer, no matter how quiet, fails to reach heaven. The Spirit carries them all, through wind, through breath, through the stillness of night, straight into the hands that hold all things together. The breeze lingered a while longer, cool and kind, then faded into gentle silence. And in that hush, the listener felt it, a peace that didn't depend on words at all. Just presence, just love. The kind of peace that settles over the heart when one realizes that even the smallest sigh is already heard by God. The candle glowed once more, and the night returned to stillness, a stillness that now carried prayer in every breath.
The room rested in near silence now, the only sound the soft rustle of night air drifting through the open window. The candle's flame had steadied again, burning low but sure, and the listener could feel something deep within beginning to unfold, slowly, quietly, like a flower opening in the first light of morning. The heart, once guarded by worry and weariness, was learning again how to rest. Stillness had a way of doing that. At first, it felt strange, almost uncomfortable, as if the absence of noise left too much room for thought. But as the minutes passed, stillness became a friend, a patient guide leading the soul toward calm. It wasn't an empty quiet. It was alive, filled with the presence of peace itself. It was the kind of stillness that Jesus often sought, in gardens before dawn, in boats upon calm waters, on hillsides beneath starlit skies. He had known that peace could not always be found in motion, but often in the sacred pause between breaths. The listener breathed in deeply, feeling the chest rise and fall with the rhythm of peace. The mind drifted to those moments in Scripture when Jesus had paused before speaking, before healing, before choosing, those holy silences that carried more meaning than words ever could. In each quiet space, something divine had been at work. The same stillness that filled those moments now seemed to fill this small room, inviting the heart to open wider, to receive rather than strive. There was no hurry here, no pressure to perform, no need to be perfect, only the gentle invitation to be loved, to be present, to be held. And as the listener yielded to that invitation, something soft began to bloom within, a quiet awareness that peace wasn't something to reach for, but something already here, waiting patiently beneath all the noise. The heart began to open like the petals of a night-blooming flower, unfurling in the dark. The edges of fear loosened. The tightness of the day dissolved, leaving room for gentleness to enter. The listener felt it, the way the Spirit moved in the quiet, tender and unhurried, filling the empty spaces with warmth. It was not a sudden change, but a gradual one, the slow surrender of a heart learning to trust stillness again. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly through the drifting clouds. A faint scent of earth and dew entered the room, grounding the moment in something real, something holy. And in that quiet communion between the natural and the divine, the heart expanded even more. It began to understand that peace was not found by escaping life, but by embracing it. Each breath, each silence, each heartbeat, each whisper of wind. Jesus had once told his followers that the kingdom of God was within them. Perhaps this was what he meant, that deep, sacred stillness where his presence dwells, where the soul finds rest, not from the world, but in it. The listener felt the truth of that now, like a warm current moving through the chest, spreading slowly through every part of the body until calm became the only rhythm left. The candle flickered once more, then steadied, its light golden and soft. The listener's eyelids grew heavier, not from exhaustion, but from peace, that quiet peace that settles over a soul no longer fighting itself.
The night deepened into a gentle hush, as though the world itself had quieted to listen. The faint flicker of the candle painted a warm glow across the room, its light dancing softly against the walls. The listener's breathing slowed, deep and rhythmic, like the tide of a calm sea. In that quiet stillness, something sacred began to stir, not in the air, but within the heart. There came a sense, not seen, but deeply felt, of Jesus drawing near. His presence wasn't loud or dramatic, it was tender, like the brush of dawn across a sleeping meadow. He did not come to command or correct, but to comfort. The soul could almost hear him whisper, "Peace, be still." Those words carried no weight of obligation, no demand to do anything, only a promise, soft as a sigh, that rest was safe here. The weary heart, so used to racing thoughts and unspoken burdens, listened. It was as though the Savior's whisper moved through the air like a melody meant only for this moment, for this soul. The worries that once echoed loud began to fade beneath the sound of his voice, a voice that spoke not to the mind, but to the spirit. "I am here," the whisper said. "You are not alone in your restlessness. I know the thoughts that chase you through the night, the fears that rise when the world grows still, but I am peace itself, the calm in your storm, the quiet in your mind.
Rest now, not because everything is fixed, but because I am with you." Those words seemed to settle like soft rain on parched ground. The listener felt them soak in, easing tension from the shoulders, loosening the weight of the chest. It was not imagination, it was remembrance. The remembrance of a truth once known but often forgotten, that the one who spoke to waves and winds also speaks to hearts. As Jesus whispered peace, the atmosphere of the room shifted, not in sight, but in feeling. The air grew warm like the gentle presence of someone sitting close, the kind of nearness that needed no words. It was the same tenderness he had shown to the weary and broken during his time on earth, the same gentle compassion that moved him to lift the heads of those bowed by sorrow. And in that stillness, the listener could almost see it, not with eyes, but with the imagination shaped by faith. Jesus, seated nearby, his eyes filled with understanding, a hand extended, not demanding, but offering, a heart radiating quiet love that spoke louder than all the noise of the day. He leaned closer, and his whisper grew even softer. "You do not have to carry it all tonight. Let the burdens rest here. I will hold them until morning." Tears might come, not of sadness, but of release, for there was freedom in surrendering to such love. The listener exhaled deeply, and in that breath, something let go. The room didn't need to change. Life didn't need to be perfect. It was enough to know that peace had a name, and it was Jesus. Outside, the crickets sang a slow, sleepy chorus. The night felt almost alive with calm. The candle flame swayed once, then grew steady again, mirroring the rhythm of the soul now resting in quiet faith. It wasn't just a story, it was an encounter, one that turned the silence of sleeplessness into a sanctuary. Jesus whispered again, barely audible, yet the words filled every corner of the heart. "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives, but as heaven does." And with that, the last of the day's worries faded away. What remained was peace, the kind that doesn't come and go, but stays, like his promise, the kind that makes even sleepless nights holy.
The night deepened across the quiet hills, wrapping the world in a soft, velvety calm. A hush rested over every shadow, every rustling leaf, every distant sound of water moving over stones. The darkness, once something that made hearts uneasy, now felt different. It seemed to breathe with the rhythm of peace. It was no longer empty or lonely. It was sacred. In that stillness, something unseen began to glow, not from lamps or stars, but from within the heart itself. Faith, like a small flame, flickered in that inward space. It had been there all along, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment when it would be seen again. The person lying awake could almost feel it, like the warmth of a hidden candle behind closed eyes. It didn't remove the darkness, but it made the darkness gentle. It softened its edges, turning fear into trust and uncertainty
into quiet awe. They remembered how Jesus once spoke of the lamp of the body being the eye, how when the eyes were full of light, the whole body was illuminated. It was not just about seeing the world clearly, but about seeing through faith, seeing with the heart instead of only with the mind. In that moment, lying in the stillness, they realized that even when all external light fades, faith is the lamp that never goes out. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing softly against the trees. It was as if creation itself whispered the same truth, that light and darkness were never enemies, but companions. The moon, hidden behind clouds, still pulled gently on the tides. The stars, even unseen, continued to burn with quiet brilliance. Everything unseen still worked faithfully, unseen but not absent, just as God's presence remained even in silence. The person took a slow breath, then another, feeling peace seep through the cracks of their restless thoughts. They thought of the many nights before when fear felt louder than peace, when every creak in the house sounded like loneliness itself. But tonight was different. It wasn't that the worries had vanished, but that the heart had found its anchor. Faith does that. It doesn't erase what is real, but transforms how it's carried. In the presence of faith, darkness becomes a canvas for light. It becomes the background against which hope shines brighter. The heart, once anxious, began to rest more deeply. It trusted that even in what could not be seen, God was still near. Jesus had once told his followers not to be afraid, for he was the light of the world. Those words echoed softly now, not in volume, but in comfort. Light of the world, not light for only the bright days, but light that shines even in the long hours when sleep is far and the mind feels heavy. Light that warms the weary, that stays even when dreams fade and the night feels endless. The listener's thoughts drifted toward that promise. Even now, in this very hour, they were seen. Their prayers didn't vanish into the dark. They rested in the same hands that shaped the stars. And in realizing that, something loosened within. The tension in their chest, the heaviness in their breath, the quiet ache of uncertainty. The night didn't change. It was still vast and shadowed, but now it was gentle, alive with holy peace. And within that calm, faith continued to glow, steady as ever, a light that never needed to shout to be seen. The soul, illuminated by quiet belief, began to rest.
The night stretched on, unhurried and calm, like an old friend sitting quietly beside the bed. In that silence, memories began to drift through the mind, soft fragments of moments touched by kindness. They came without effort, like the steady rhythm of waves on the shore. The person lying awake didn't call for them. They simply arrived, carried on the quiet current of reflection. They remembered a gentle word once spoken when they had felt unseen, a small gesture that had lifted their heart when it was heavy. It was the smile of a friend, the warmth of a hand reaching out when life had seemed cold. Each memory was a light, small but sure, filling the room of the heart with golden warmth. The anxious pulse that had once raced began to slow, soothed not by distraction, but by remembrance. Kindness, after all, had always been one of Jesus' quiet miracles. He never needed grand displays to reveal heaven's nearness. He showed it in simple compassion, a touch on the shoulder of a leper, a meal shared with those forgotten, a tear shed at the tomb of a friend. Those who watched him often spoke of power, but those who listened closely knew it was his gentleness that changed the world. As the person breathed deeply, they realized that even their smallest acts of kindness, those offered and those received, were part of that same divine thread. Every time they had forgiven, comforted, or smiled despite pain, they had allowed Jesus' Spirit to move through them. And every kindness ever shown to them had been his reminder, you are not alone. You are loved beyond measure. The nervous thoughts that had stirred restlessly began to quiet. The body followed the heart's lead, shoulders unclenching, hands resting open. Kindness has a way of softening what fear hardens. It does not shout, it hums like a lullaby. And as these memories played like soft echoes through the night, the air itself seemed gentler, touched by grace. Outside the window, a soft drizzle began to fall. The sound was rhythmic, gentle percussion on leaves and earth. It reminded the listener of another kind of kindness, the patience of rain. How it comes without demand, offering refreshment to everything it touches, asking for nothing in return. It was a lesson from creation itself, echoing Jesus' words that the Father sends rain on both the just and the unjust. Grace is never earned, it is poured freely. As these thoughts settled in, peace grew stronger. The heart found rest in gratitude. Every kind act remembered became a prayer of thanks. Every gentle memory was a reminder that goodness still lives in the world, that God's love still finds ways to appear, in strangers' smiles, in unexpected mercy, in quiet forgiveness. The person turned slightly beneath the blanket, exhaling softly. The mind that once chased every thought now followed one simple truth. Love has always been stronger than fear. It is the kindness of God, not his judgment, that leads hearts towards peace. And in that peace, something deep began to shift. The body relaxed completely as though each cell recognized the safety of being loved. The nerves, once tense and alert, were now soothed by grace. It was as if invisible hands, gentle and sure, had smoothed away every worry. The night, once so long, now felt shorter, sweeter. The memories of kindness did not just visit, they stayed, wrapping the soul in a soft, sacred hush. In that hush, Jesus' Spirit lingered, a calm presence whispering without words, "Rest, my beloved. You are safe in my love." And under that whisper, the heart finally began to drift.
The night had grown still again, as though all creation paused in reverence. The hum of distant sounds faded, replaced by the faint rhythm of breathing and the steady beat of a heart learning how to rest. It was in moments like this, when words ran out and the world felt hushed, that the nearness of the divine could be felt most clearly. Not in thunder, not in fire, not even in dreams, but in quiet. The listener lay still beneath the blanket, eyes half closed, tracing the sound of their own heartbeat. It echoed softly in the silence, like a reminder that life itself was a miracle of God's breath. Every rise and fall of the chest was not random. It was grace repeating its promise, "I am here." Even when no one speaks, even when there is nothing left to say, His presence abides. They remembered how Jesus often withdrew to quiet places, to mountains, to gardens, to the edge of the sea. Crowds would follow Him everywhere, yet He always made time to be alone, to speak with His Father in stillness. Perhaps that was why His words carried such peace, because they were born from silence first. The listener thought of that often, that stillness is not emptiness, but sacred space, a meeting place between the weary soul and the heart of God. A soft sigh escaped them as the truth settled in. The presence of Jesus was not something that had to be summoned. It was already here. The same love that calmed the storm still moved through unseen air, steady and faithful. It did not need sound or light to be real. It needed only awareness, a heart turned quietly toward heaven, listening. In that awareness, the air seemed to change. The space around the bed felt lighter, warmer, as if filled with invisible hands of comfort. There was no fear now, no rush to fall asleep, only peace. Even the shadows on the wall seemed gentler, softened by that invisible nearness. The presence of Jesus was not just beside them, it was within them, woven into their breath, their thoughts, their every heartbeat. The person thought of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, walking in grief, not realizing that the risen Christ was beside them. Only when they paused, breaking bread together, did they see Him for who He was. That memory lingered like a parable. How often hearts hurry past the divine because they forget to stop and notice. But here, in the stillness of night, there was no hurry. There was only presence, holy, quiet, complete. They breathed deeply again, this time more slowly, as though drawing in peace itself. And with each breath came a realization that the divine presence was not confined to a moment. It was a constant companionship. God was not somewhere far beyond the stars, but near, so near that even the smallest whisper of the soul was heard. The silence, once so heavy, became a sanctuary, and in that sanctuary, rest began to root. It wasn't forced, nor was it fleeting. It came naturally, like the tide returning to the shore. In the gentle rhythm of night, they found peace in the truth that has never changed. Jesus is near, always near, not only in bright mornings and joyful days, but here, in the tender stillness of sleepless hours. His presence does not depend on sound or sight. It simply is. The listener's last conscious thought before drifting deeper was one of gratitude. Gratitude for stillness, for breath, for the holy quiet where God whispers peace into the heart. And in that sacred quiet they rested deeply, cradled by presence itself.
The mind, once tangled with restlessness, began to loosen its grip on the day. Thoughts rose and fell like leaves floating downstream, carried by a current that asked for no control. Each one, whether a memory, a worry, or a dream, was met with gentle care. There was no need to force stillness. It came on its own, slow and patient, as the heart learned to trust the rhythm of peace. In the hush of the room, the listener felt as though Jesus himself was near, watching over every wandering thought with understanding eyes. He did not silence the thoughts or push them away. He simply held them, one by one, as though gathering them into his hands. Every fear, every unfinished hope, every passing memory found its place in his quiet presence. It was as if his love whispered to the mind, "You don't need to fight the noise. Just rest in me." Outside, the night had grown deeper, yet softer too. The sound of wind moving through the trees was like a lullaby sung by creation. Even the faint chirp of crickets carried a rhythm of peace. The listener realized how everything around them seemed to flow effortlessly, how rivers do not question their direction, how stars do not strain to shine. They simply follow the order of the one who made them. And so, the thoughts continued to drift, but now without tension. Each one, no matter how fleeting, was met with kindness. It was a holy sort of letting go, the surrender not of reason, but of burden. The listener remembered Jesus' words about the lilies of the field, how they neither toil nor spin, and yet are clothed in beauty. If even the smallest flower is tended to with such care, how much more the human heart? A calm realization settled in. The same tender care that governs the universe also watches over the restless mind. Every thought is seen, every ache understood. Nothing escapes his awareness. There was comfort in knowing that even in the quiet confusion of sleeplessness, one is fully known and deeply loved. As the listener rested, they pictured their thoughts like small boats on a wide, shimmering lake. Some drifted toward the horizon and disappeared. Others lingered, circling gently before fading away. But through it all, the surface remained calm, still waters guided by unseen hands. In that stillness, prayer became effortless, not the kind spoken aloud, but the kind felt deep within, the prayer of trust, of simply existing before God. It was a wordless conversation between Creator and creation, where love did all the speaking. The longer the silence stretched, the more peaceful it became. It was no longer a void to be filled, but a gift to be received. Every thought now seemed lighter, like feathers resting on air. Even those old worries that had felt heavy began to lose their power, softened by divine tenderness. The listener turned slightly, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep. They felt held, not by circumstance,
but by love itself. This was the kind of peace that Jesus spoke of, the one the world cannot give, because it does not depend on perfection or answers. It is peace born from trust, nurtured in surrender, and sustained by grace. And as the mind continued to drift, it was no longer lost. It was guided. Every direction, every gentle thought, every silent breath moved under his care. The night itself became a quiet prayer, a resting in love, too deep for words. In that love, they found peace, steady, endless, and sure.
The hours slipped by quietly, unnoticed, as the air grew cooler and the world more hushed. Somewhere outside, a night bird sang once, and then went still, leaving behind a silence that felt almost holy. In that tender quiet, peace began to settle, not suddenly, but gently, like dew descending upon the fields just before dawn. It touched everything without noise, glistening where no one could see, soaking into the earth and into the soul. The listener lay still, feeling that same quiet dew gathering within, the slow, sacred moisture of grace. Peace didn't arrive as an idea or a lesson. It arrived as presence, wordless and soft. It was the kind of peace that doesn't ask to be noticed, but simply is, finding every dry place in the heart and refreshing it with life again. The mind, once busy and heavy, now seemed far away. It no longer reached for answers or replayed conversations. It rested. And in that rest, they felt what Jesus meant when he said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you." It wasn't the absence of storms, but the calm that holds steady even when the winds still move. It was a deep, grounded assurance that all is well because he is near. In the still darkness, the listener's thoughts drifted to the hills of Galilee, where the air once shimmered with that same divine stillness. They imagined Jesus walking there at twilight, the light fading gold behind him, the grass brushing softly against his feet. He moved slowly, purposefully, as though time itself bent to the rhythm of his peace. When he spoke, even the restless winds seemed to still, as though creation itself recognized its maker. And now that same peace seemed to echo across time, across years, across oceans, until it reached this quiet room. It filled the corners, smoothed the edges of worry, and wrapped itself around the one who listened. There was no sound, only the faint feeling of being completely safe, like a child drifting off in the comfort of a parent's arms. Peace has a way of teaching without speaking. It tells the heart that it is okay to stop striving, to release what cannot be changed, to let go of what weighs too much. It teaches that rest is not weakness, it is trust. The listener began to understand that true faith is not always loud or full of declarations. Sometimes it is this:
quiet breathing, open hands, and a heart willing to be still. Outside, the sky deepened into darker blue, and the scent of earth rose faintly through the window. It was the scent of new beginnings hiding inside endings, the kind that only peace can reveal. The world, through all its noise and motion, would continue to turn. But in this small moment, everything had paused for grace. The listener's eyelids felt heavy, but not from exhaustion. It was the weight of peace itself, a tender surrender that asked nothing in return. The soul had finally found the rhythm of stillness, a place where there was no need to search anymore. Somewhere in that half-dreaming space, a final thought lingered. Peace does not shout. It descends quietly, like dew that refreshes without being seen. And when it comes, the soul recognizes it, not as something new, but as something it had always known. And so, beneath the quiet heavens, the listener rested in that timeless truth. The same peace that fell upon the fields long ago now rested upon their heart, soft, gentle, eternal.
The quiet deepened until it seemed even time had slowed. The heart, once quickened by worries and restless thoughts, now beat in a soft, steady rhythm, slow, sure, peaceful. It was as though the body itself had begun to echo the calm of distant seas under moonlight. Each heartbeat carried a whisper. You are safe. You are loved. You can rest now. The listener could almost imagine being by the water's edge, where waves moved with perfect patience, rising and falling without rush or fear. That rhythm, the rise, the fall, the gentle pause between, felt like a reflection of divine peace. It was how Jesus walked through life, never hurried, never anxious, always in perfect harmony with his Father's will. The heart, tuning itself to that same cadence, began to mirror that heavenly calm. It's in this quiet slowing that the soul learns something sacred, that peace is not a feeling to chase, but a rhythm to receive. It cannot be forced. It must be allowed. The listener took a long, deep breath and released it slowly, feeling the body yield more deeply to rest. The heart continued its steady beat, a living metronome set to heaven's pace. They remembered the story of when Jesus calmed the storm, how the waves had raged and the wind howled, and yet with only a few words, "Peace, be still," the sea obeyed. It wasn't just the wind and water that responded, it was the disciples' trembling hearts too. Now, lying still in the darkness, the listener understood that story in a new way. Sometimes the storm outside doesn't need to change. It's the storm within that he calms first. The night air was cool against their skin, carrying a faint scent of rain and earth. It felt cleansing, like every breath washed away remnants of the day. The heartbeat slowed in, matching the rhythm of the unseen ocean beyond imagination. In that rhythm, they felt connected to the Creator, to creation, to the unbroken flow of life sustained by divine love. Jesus' life was filled with motion, teaching, healing, walking from town to town, but his spirit never lost that inner stillness. Even when crowds pressed around him, his heart remained steady,
unshaken. It was that same steady presence that now filled this quiet space. It was as though he stood beside the bed, calm as the sea after a storm, saying once more, "Be still. It's all right. I am here." The listener's pulse softened even further. Their breathing lengthened. The body began to feel weightless, almost as though floating on the gentle surface of faith itself. There was no striving left, no urgency, no fear, just the deep, slow rhythm of life held safely in divine hands. Outside, somewhere far away, a train hummed faintly in the night, its sound distant and soft. Even that seemed to blend into the symphony of peace that surrounded them. Every sound was part of the same stillness, every heartbeat a note in the song of rest. And as they lay there, they realized that this rhythm had always been there, beneath the noise of life, beneath the endless lists and the unspoken worries. It had been waiting for this moment of surrender, when the soul would quiet enough to hear it again. The heartbeats continued, slow, faithful, alive. Each one was a reminder of God's care, each one an echo of calm seas under starlight. And with every beat, the listener sank deeper into rest, drifting closer to that holy stillness where sleep and prayer become the same thing. Peace had not just entered the room, it had entered the body, the breath, the rhythm of being itself. And in that peace, everything was finally beautifully still.
In the stillness that followed the slowing of the heart, there came a voice, not loud or commanding, but soft, tender, and steady. It was the kind of voice that didn't disturb the quiet, but deepened it. It was the voice of Jesus, not speaking to the ears, but to the heart. Not a sound in the air, but a presence in the soul. It began as a whisper woven into the rhythm of breath. Peace I give to you, my peace, not as the world gives. The words drifted through the silence like a warm breeze through open curtains. The listener could feel them, not as thoughts, but as comfort, like hands laid gently on weary shoulders. That voice carried something that no other sound could. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't heavy, it wasn't sharp. It was full of understanding, of love that expected nothing in return. It didn't ask for anything, it only offered rest. The listener felt tears gather quietly at the corners of their eyes, not from sadness, but from release. They hadn't realized how heavy their spirit had been until the voice began to lift it. Jesus spoke again, softly. "You have carried much today, my child. You have tried to be strong even when your heart trembled. But I was with you in every moment. I saw every sigh, every thought you couldn't put into words. And now you can let it all go." The listener's body sank deeper into stillness.
Their hands relaxed, their jaw loosened, and the air around them seemed to shimmer with gentleness. They could almost picture him sitting nearby, perhaps at the edge of the bed or beside the open window, his eyes kind, his face calm, his presence glowing with quiet compassion. The light around him wasn't blinding, but warm and steady, like candlelight that never goes out. "You are not alone," his voice said. "You have never been alone. Even when the night felt endless, I was the calm within it. Even when your prayers felt unanswered, I was the silence holding you. You are mine. Rest now." Those words seemed to echo in every corner of the soul. The silence, once empty, now felt alive with grace. It wasn't just quiet, it was full of comfort, full of divine nearness. The listener realized that peace wasn't the absence of sound or thought. Peace was a person. Peace was Jesus himself. The night deepened, yet it no longer felt dark. The moonlight spilling through the window seemed to carry his words, silver and soft. The air was cool and light, and even the smallest noises, the hum of the night insects, the soft creak of the house, felt like part of his song. Jesus continued to speak, not always in words, but in presence. His voice was everywhere, in the slowing breath, in the steady heart, in the silence that now wrapped itself around the listener like a blanket. Every moment of stillness was his reminder, "You can rest because I am awake. You can sleep because I never sleep." The worries of the day had faded completely now. What once felt urgent had melted into insignificance. The body was at peace, the mind quiet, the heart still. There was no resistance left, only surrender, gentle and total. And in that surrender, Jesus' final words came, almost like a lullaby. "Be still and know that I am God. The night is mine, the morning will be too." The listener exhaled, long and deep. The voice faded, not into silence, but into presence, like the echo of a wave that never truly ends. Peace filled the room, soft as dawnlight before sunrise. And as the listener drifted into sleep, one truth lingered gently in their heart. The voice of Jesus never truly fades. It speaks peace not only into the night, but into every storm, every silence, every restless place within. Sleep came easily, wrapped in the voice that first spoke light into the world, and now whispered rest into a weary soul.
The night had deepened, and yet it no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt holy, alive with stillness, wrapped in the kind of quiet that feels alive with love. The listener could sense it now, the presence of Jesus, close, real, and unshakable. It wasn't a vision or a dream. It was a knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't need proof, because the heart recognizes what the mind cannot explain. The room seemed bathed in a light that didn't come from any lamp or moonbeam. It was a gentle, golden glow that seemed to breathe with them. It didn't shine on things, it shone through them. Even the shadows felt softened, as though his peace had touched every corner. The listener could almost feel him sitting close, perhaps at the side of the bed or standing near the window, watching over them, calm and protective. Every breath carried his nearness. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It was tangible, like a soft hand resting over their heart, steady and reassuring. The warmth spread slowly, filling the chest, flowing through the arms, down to the fingertips, and into the legs and feet. It was as if love itself had taken on weight and wrapped itself around the body, soothing away every ache, every leftover fear. Jesus' words lingered in the air like a melody that hadn't yet faded. I am with you always. Not just in daylight, not only in prayer, but even here, in the quiet hours when the world feels far away. The listener realized something beautiful. This was the same presence that had been with them through every moment of their life. Through joy and heartbreak, through seasons of strength and moments of despair. Even in times when they felt abandoned, he had been there, steady, patient, waiting for them to notice. And now, in the stillness, that awareness bloomed fully. The heart whispered back, "You are here, Lord." And that simple truth filled every empty space. The loneliness that once echoed in the room melted into peace. The fear of tomorrow faded, replaced by the quiet assurance that whatever comes, they will not face it alone. Because his presence is not bound by place or time. It is eternal, faithful, and constant. The night air carried the faint rustle of leaves outside, as if creation itself was sighing in peace. The stars beyond the window seemed to pulse softly, each one a silent reminder of his majesty. And within that great expanse, he was still near, near enough to feel the rhythm of each breath, near enough to catch every unspoken thought. It was comforting to imagine his robe brushing lightly against the floor, his gentle eyes watching, not with judgment, but with the deepest love imaginable. A love that doesn't leave when you falter, a love that stays when you're weary, a love that asks for nothing but your rest. You are safe, the presence seemed to whisper, without sound. You are loved. You are mine.
The listener felt tears again, but this time they came not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Gratitude for this peace, this closeness, this promise. They realized that the presence of Jesus wasn't something they had to chase or earn. It had been waiting quietly all along, like a soft light behind a closed door, ready to spill out the moment they stopped trying to control the night. Now they didn't need words. They didn't need to pray or think or ask. All they had to do was rest in Him, not beside Him, not near Him, but within His love. The world outside could keep turning, the clock could keep ticking, but inside this small sacred space, time stood still. Only peace remained. The presence of Jesus surrounded everything: the air, the mind, the heart, the silence itself. It wasn't just around the listener, it was within them. They had become part of His stillness, His calm, His eternal rest. As the eyelids grew heavier, the last thought drifted through their mind like a lullaby. If His presence fills this night, then I have nothing to fear. And as they surrendered fully to rest, they understood His comfort wasn't just near them, it was them now. His peace had become their peace, His breath their breath, His rest their rest. In that sacred quiet, surrounded by the fullness of His love, the soul found what it had long searched for, not just sleep, but perfect rest in His presence.
The night had deepened into its quietest hour. Outside, even the wind seemed to hush itself, as though honoring the peace that had settled in. Within that stillness, the listener's heart began to reflect, not just on His presence, but on His example. Jesus Himself had known exhaustion. He had known long days, heavy with need, surrounded by multitudes who pressed upon Him for healing, for hope, for a touch that would make them whole. Yet even the Son of God had rested. There were moments, remembered now like gentle echoes, when Jesus withdrew to quiet places, hillsides, gardens, the edge of the sea. He would step away from the noise of the world, away from the demands and expectations, and sit beneath the open sky. The breeze would move softly through the grass, and the rhythm of creation would steady His heart. There He prayed, not always in words, but in presence. It was communion with His Father, deep and silent. And sometimes He simply slept. There was that night on the boat, when the sea raged and the storm howled. The disciples were frantic, convinced they would perish. But Jesus slept through the storm, His head resting upon a cushion, utterly at peace. The waves rose and the wind roared, but His spirit remained calm, anchored in trust. For He knew that His Father never slumbers. The storm could not harm
what heaven held secure. The listener thought about that. How Jesus slept in the middle of chaos. How his rest wasn't a sign of weakness, but of faith. To sleep while the world trembles is to say, I know who holds me. To rest when the mind wants to run wild is to whisper, I trust you, Lord. And in that realization came a new kind of peace. The listener felt their body sink deeper into the bed, the muscles releasing, the mind loosening its grip on worry. To rest, they understood, was not to give up, it was to give in, to surrender not to fear, but to faith. In the stillness, they could almost see him again. Jesus, the teacher, the friend, standing near, the faint outline of his robe glowing softly in the dark. His eyes were kind, filled with knowing. There was no rush in him, no urgency, only quiet compassion. Even I rested, his voice seemed to say. I walked long roads. I healed the broken. I carried the cross. But I also lay down my head, trusting my Father to keep me through the night. Do the same. Rest in the same hands that held me. The listener breathed in deeply, as though drawing in those words. The air felt lighter, warmer, almost like sunlight carried into the night. The thought of Jesus resting made rest feel sacred, no longer an act of fatigue, but of faith. They remembered how often he spoke of peace, not as the world gives, but as something eternal. His peace wasn't the absence of struggle, it was the presence of God in the middle of it. And that peace could settle even the most restless spirit. The listener let that truth sink in. To rest like Jesus did, it wasn't just about closing one's eyes, it was about letting go, about trusting the unseen hands that cradle the soul. It was about believing that while they sleep, he works. While they are silent, he sings over them. A faint hum seemed to fill the air, perhaps the quiet vibration of life itself, or maybe something deeper, divine. The night no longer felt long. It felt holy. The bed became an altar of peace. The heartbeat slowed, steady as a drum of trust. And there, in that simple act of breathing, the listener understood. Jesus didn't just teach rest, he lived it. He showed what it meant to find calm in storms, to find stillness amid noise, to find renewal in surrender. Rest was not something to earn. It was a gift to receive. And as they drifted toward that gift now, the final thought whispered through their spirit, tender and certain. If the Savior rested in his Father's care, so will I. The night grew softer still, like a veil of light falling gently over the soul. And within that holy quiet, the listener rested, not just beside Jesus, but with him.
The world had gone completely still now. The faint whisper of wind outside the window was softer than a sigh, and the room seemed wrapped in a sacred hush. The listener lay quiet beneath the covers, breathing slowly, their mind calm and their spirit tender. The night no longer felt empty. It felt alive, with something holy, like a soft light that couldn't be seen but could be deeply felt. The peace in the air was not ordinary. It was deep, anchored, almost ancient. It was the same peace that settled over the hillside when angels sang over Bethlehem. The same peace that surrounded the tomb on the morning when all creation waited for resurrection. It was the same peace that flowed from Jesus' words when he said, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." The listener could sense that now. They were no longer just resting in their bed, they were resting in his presence. The night had become a sanctuary, a temple not made of stone or light, but of stillness. And now, as your eyes grow heavier, let the quiet deepen. Let each breath fall softer than the last. The world can wait. Tomorrow will come in its time. For now, this is your moment to rest, safe and warm beneath his care. The worries of the day can fade now. The questions can rest unanswered. You don't need to think your way to peace. You are already wrapped in it. The love of Jesus covers you like a blanket, steady, sure, and gentle. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a calm sky. Feel the air fill your lungs, then leave again, slow and peaceful. Every breath is grace. Every heartbeat is proof that he is near. The night is not dark when he is in it. His peace lights every shadow. His presence fills every corner. You are not alone. You have never been. Let go of the noise, the striving, the memories that try to keep you awake. Let his voice quiet them all. Let his calm draw you close, closer still, until there is nothing left but rest. You are safe now. You are loved now. And as you drift into sleep, know this truth. Jesus watches over you with a love that never sleeps. His peace is your peace. His rest is your rest. Sleep deeply tonight, beloved. Rest easy in his arms. Ready to transform your mindset? Follow Psyche Clarified for insights on self-growth, emotional well-being, and achieving a balanced, fulfilling life.